All right, so welcome. This is my first video, so be nice. But if you do have any feedback or comments or questions, definitely comment them, or you can reach out to me on one of my handles. I'm JennaBot5000. But let's jump right in. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to create our very own server. So we're going to have an API that's running that will connect to our server, and our server is going to connect to our database. And we're going to be using Node.js, we're going to be using MongoDB, we're going to be using Express, and then for deployment we're going to be using Heroku. I really like all of this technology. I am going to say that with Heroku, it's not really for giant projects. This is a really great way to just kind of either showcase your skill set or just give yourself some practice in terms of having your stuff actually out there and able to be used by a front-end application without needing the local host to run it. So for this video, we are going to be starting simple, and I'm doing this on purpose. We have a simple boilerplate that we're going to be starting with that I created. And what we're going to do today is we're going to create and seed our MongoDB database. We are going to connect that database to our app. And then we're going to run our server, and we're going to make sure that we have our API constructed with the appropriate middleware. All APIs should have middleware for security. I imagine the bigger the server and the app gets, the more crucial and the more intricate the middleware is. But we're going to start with just the basic middleware that I think any backend server application should have. And then we are going to create and run some tests to actually see how the server and API are working. And so we are going to be doing a little bit of test-driven development today. That is the way that I prefer to build my backend. I imagine it's good for the front end as well, but with the front end, you actually do have more of a visual with it. So, obviously you can see if your component is showing up where you would expect it to, or if something's out of alignment, or if you're expecting certain data to show up and it's not. It's really obvious when it comes to the front end, but with the back end, you don't have that. If you're trying to test or see your data, you would need to run the server and make calls to the local host, and we're going to just not do that. We're just going to have our tests make those calls because, one, we will have built our tests. So this is something that we can just use as we're continuing to create our application and develop it and add more features, which is something that I intend to do in some other videos. And then we will just know that it works because the tests will prove to us that we're getting the results that we would expect. And then finally, we're going to deploy. So we're going to take this server and we're going to put it on Heroku, and it's officially going to be out there. So you could connect a front-end application to it. You can have it open for other people to connect their front-end applications to it. And hopefully this will kind of paint a picture of, what an API is and what it actually does. When you're connecting to a random API, you're actually going to have a little bit of an idea of what it looks like in the back end, what's happening with the parts that you can't necessarily see. So, and then like I said, I am planning on making some other videos that are going to kind of be building on this, and we'll be adding authentication. So basically you need a username and password to get certain information, post and delete endpoints so that you can make an API call to add something or delete something or edit something. And then of course that means that we'll be building some more tests to show that we're getting the results that we expect. And then another thing is I really love MongoDB. I have used SQL. I can see the value in both of them, but when it comes to just using it in general, specifically when it comes to finding data from a different area in your database and combining it with some data that you already have or some data that you can easily access, that I think MongoDB has definitely got that down better, because you don't have to join tables, you don't have to write weird functions to like connect certain things and then pull the data. It's a lot easier than that, and that's something that we'll see in the other videos. So first thing that we're going to do is open our developer environment. And I think if you are watching this video, you're probably confident in coding to some degree. You most likely already have an IDE on your computer. And I am using VS Code. I am a huge fan of VS Code. The extensions are phenomenal. I think it's pretty intuitive once you get the hang of using it. And there is a great video that I'm going to be adding in here that I would recommend watching if you're using VS Code and you're not sure you're using it as much as you would like, or if you're not using it to its full potential. There's a video that I watched a little while ago by James Quick on like VS Code extensions and snippets and how you can really make the most of VS Code to do really as little work as possible. Because if we don't have to worry as much about, you know, what we're typing, and we're utilizing autocomplete, and we're utilizing, you know, bracket extensions that can point things out for us, then that's a lot less time on that and more time on the big picture of what we're trying to create, how to make it run faster, etc. So obviously IDE, we do need Node installed. So that's Node Package Manager. If you Google Node Package Manager, it's pretty easy to install. Just follow the instructions. And in our case, we can pull up our terminal. And if you want to see if you already have Node, I'm just going to do this to change it to my own directory, but you can do Node Package npm-v. And then I can see here that I have Node version 6. So we have Node. The other thing that you're going to need is a MongoDB account. So that's also really easy, and I'm going to add a video as well that I watched from Traversy Media, or Traversy Media. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but he did a really great video on just how to get started with MongoDB. And but you are going to need a MongoDB account so that you can create your database through Atlas, and obviously a Heroku account, because we're going to have our database and we're going to have our server running on Heroku, which will connect to our MongoDB database. If you want to install Postman, you can. A lot of people like Postman because it kind of shows you the results of your API calls and really just like the hard data. But like I said, we're gonna primarily be using the tests to show us. And obviously Git and GitHub. And like I said, if you're watching this video, I definitely feel like you probably have Git and GitHub, because this is a GitHub repository, and you either found this on GitHub, or because I posted a link to it, or you found it on YouTube. So, all right, so the first thing that we're gonna do is, obviously, I know we have all of our we have our dev environment set up. So we're just gonna get this boilerplate. We're gonna grab it. So going in here, you're going to go to code, and you're going to copy this link. And then in your terminal, you're going to want to, I'm pretty sure for me it'll be projects. And I'm just going to drop this. Basically what you want to do, CD is change directory, and you want to make your way into the folder that you want this server to be, or the server code rather, to be sitting in while we're building it. So we're going to do git clone, and actually the other thing I want to do is basically show you the README, which has some really good instructions on just how to get it started. So what we're currently doing is cloning the repository into our local machine. So we're doing git clone, and then you have the link, and then right here you're going to add what you want this project to actually be named. Because obviously you don't want it to be called MongoDB Express Boilerplate. You're probably utilizing this for some other reason, or maybe you just want to use it to test. So we're going to do git clone. We're going to paste this. We'll just copy and paste this whole thing. Well, we'll copy and paste to here. Copy. I don't really know what happened there, but that's fine. Paste. And then we're going to call this one for test video. So now we have officially cloned this repo into our projects folder. So if I press ls, you can see all my projects, but you can see right here for test video. And then we are going to go into that repository. So now that we're in it, we want to do two things. So the first thing is we want to basically just reset Git. Like, you don't need all of the Git commits that I made when I built this boilerplate. You just want nice and fresh, right? So this is remove. This right here is basically saying we're forcing it and then we're doing it recursively, aka if I tried to just clean it out of this one folder, it would be a brat because there are subfolders and things like that, and Git will be like, wait, am I supposed to just do this folder? I can't because this folder has this folder in it and you didn't give me permission to do that. So RF is saying, hey, I want you to do this because I'm telling you to, and I want you to do all of the folders involved with it. We're going to clean everything in here. So we're saying do that with Git, and then right here we're saying start it all over. So you can see that the name of the branch changed to master. That isn't something we can fix yet. We need to make our first commit, and we're going to wait to do that, but I do think it's worth mentioning that you should make commits really whenever you make any type of change. So if you add any type of feature or anything like that, just make a commit. Small commits are much better. You don't want to make one small mistake in a commit that you did a ton of things in, because if you have to undo it, then you're losing way more than you should have lost. So now that we've done that, we are going to install our dependencies. We're going to install our dependencies by just running npm install. So all we're doing here is there is a package.json file, and we want Node to use that package.json file to install the dependencies that we want. And what we're going to do now is we'll take a look in the actual folder, and I'm going to show you the dependencies that we have with this project just to start. So for test video, and then we're going to open the terminal in here to do the very last thing that we need to do before we really jump in and have this running. But let's take a look at our package.json to see the dependencies that we have so far. So cores.env, helmet, express, mongoose, and Morgan. So Morgan and cores and helmet are all middleware, and we'll get into that in just a minute. .env is how we access data from the .env file, which we're actually about to edit right now. And mongoose is how we are going to communicate with MongoDB. I have been told that you can do it, especially now, like right to MongoDB. Like, you don't necessarily need mongoose to communicate with MongoDB. But I do like mongoose in how it sets up the schema, and it's just, it's very, it's like you can just list it and then you don't really have to worry about it. Whereas with MongoDB, you do have more flexibility, but sometimes it's not the best to have a lot of flexibility. Like if you have a bunch of entries in one of your collections that don't match, it'll be impossible to find the information that you want. So, and then for our dev dependencies, we're using Chai, which is, so Chai and Mocha and Supertest are all for the testing that we're going to do. ESLint config prettier, and prettier are just to help the code look nice, because I'm a very big fan of legible, maintainable code. You know, if I were to fall off the face of the planet, could someone make sense of the code that I've written, or is it just a jumbly mess? And so that involves the visual of it. You know, is the code compressed? Are there no no return, are there no breaks in the code that make it easier to read? Is it segmented up enough so that someone could make sense of, you know, oh, let's go to this file, let's go to this file, or is it all in one file? You know, all of this stuff is really important when it comes to maintainability and basically just making it so that other people can actually use your code. And then nodemon is, which I already mentioned before, it's basically we can run our server from the local host. So those are our dependencies, and you can also see dev dependencies. So this is just, we're going to be using this as we're setting things up, and these are the ones that we definitely need to use as we are working through the production and the development. So flat dependencies are used throughout, dev dependencies very obviously in development. So so let's go back to our README and wrap up what we were doing, right? So we got to step 4, we installed the node dependencies, and now we need to move our .env file. So .env is the is that dependency that I mentioned, and it basically makes it so that we are able to access the data in this file and put it into our application. And the reason why I named this example.env is because you can put this into a GitHub repo. I mean, really, you could put a .env file into your GitHub repo, but don't ever do that, because this file is supposed to hold our sensitive information. So we have our gitignore file that says, hey, if you're pushing this up into Git, do not push node modules, because this is a ton of stuff that we don't need, because anyone will just run npm install and they can install it for themselves. So it keeps the file smaller, it keeps it cleaner. And then .env, we're saying, hey, make sure that you completely ignore this file, because this is where we're going to be storing like our JWT, it's where we're going to be storing, you know, an API key. We don't want, and our database URL, like we don't want that type of information out in the ether space, because there are people on the internet that are not very nice, and they, for whatever reason, like to break stuff. I'm assuming there's some sort of personal gain from it. I don't understand it, but it doesn't change the fact that it happens. It's just like when you drive defensively, you know, you're better safe than sorry. So we're telling Git to ignore these two things. So we need to change this to just a flat .env file so that our middleware .env will be able to pull from it. And we'll see how it does that in just a minute. But firstly, we want to, so there are two ways we can do this. If we're in VS Code, it's very easy to just right click and rename. If you're in the terminal, you can just do this, move. Like, it's weird because it's the move key in the terminal, but it's actually also works as a change the name type of thing, because we're not giving it a location, we're just giving it a new file name. So we'll click that. And you can see here, this is now a .env file. And you can also see, I don't know if this is because of an extension that I have, but .env is now grayed out, aka GitHub is going to ignore it. And we're going to look at it really quick. So I did make some like example URLs. I would recommend keeping these variables as they are, because the boilerplate is set up to pull from these particular URLs. And you'll see in this video how much easier it is versus if I were to say like, oh, I want this to be like MongoDB URL. That means I now have to change everything that's pulling from the Atlas URI, and just not worth it, right? So these are going to be our database links. This is just an example variable, what you would expect, our JWT secret and our JWT expiring. Node environment, this is it'll default to development, but this, like when we run it in Heroku will change it to production. The port, this is where we're running it locally, so we'll run it on localhost /8000. that's the gist of that. So now that let's look actually to make sure we've wrapped this up. So the last thing we want to do is we're just going to jump back into our package.json, and we're just changing the name of the app, because you can see right here the name is MongoDB Express Boilerplate. This, like all of this right here, is basically just like this, and then the author part. You can really, I mean, obviously I'm not the author of your application. I just gave you a boilerplate. And then here, I'm just going to rename this for consistency's sake, which is really important for test video. And so now, looking at the README, we've officially set it up, right? So now we have our app set up. Now, what we need to do, what I want to start with is creating the database. And the reason why is because if we have the server working with our database and the database doesn't exist, it's going to be really tricky to test, obviously. So we're going to go to MongoDB. We're just going to type that to just jump right into it through Google. Now I have an account already, so we're just going to sign in here. I sign in through Google. Obviously, you can make your own account or you can use this way. So the first thing that we want to do is I'm actually going to delete this database, because this is what we're going to want to utilize, and I want to start it from scratch as if you you've never done this before, right? So let's delete this test database. Oh. Okay, so we're going to create a new project to start. So let's say you've logged in, you're able to look at your projects. You may have some if you're already familiar, and if not, then you just want to go to new project. And then we are going to call this for test video. You can add more owners. Obviously, this one's just going to be me. And now we're going to build our databases. So what we're going to do is, for this database, for my example, which I'm going to show you, we're going to use the collection name exercises. And that's just because that's how I have it set up in the app. When we look at it, you can see if you want to change the name of it to whatever it is that you want to do. I'm just using exercises because that's, it's just an example. So obviously I'm going to be using the free version, because this is kind of similar to Heroku in that it's obviously it's free when it's small, and when it's small, we're just trying to showcase our skills or practice. For the recommended regions, it's funny because it starred all of these, but my recommendation, and I was told this by my development mentor that I had last year, that just choose the one that's closest to you geographically. So I'm going to choose North Virginia. North Virginia. We're going to do North Virginia because I'm in Nashville. So we're just going to leave this the way it is on the... So our new cluster is being created, and we are going to just wait a minute for that to... Okay, so we have officially created our first project with this cluster, and this one's just going to be our basic one, like our production database. So this is the one we're actually going to be deploying, but we want to make a test version as well that our tests can manipulate without having to worry about messing up our production database. So we're going to go back and we are going to create a new project, and we're going to call this one for test video test. We're just going to add test in big capitals just to make it really obvious that it's the exact same thing, but it's just going to be a test version. And we're going to wait for this one to be created. So we have to wait for MongoDB to do its thing. Oh. Oh, right. So we have to do the exact same thing. Creating our cluster. Like I said, North Virginia. For me, it'll probably be different for you. And now we're going to wait for the cluster to create. Okay, so now that both of our projects are up, and basically what it is we have two projects, one that's production, one that's test, and we want to connect these to our application to start. So what you need to do for that, and well, you press connect. Then it is going to say, oh, you can't connect. You need to we need to give MongoDB some information to make sure that this connection is secure. So we need to give it a username and a password, and then we will be able to plug that into our .env file. So I'm gonna show my stuff on here, but just so everyone knows, I am deleting it, so don't try to hack into my stuff. So what we want to do is we want to make it so that we're able to connect to this database. If you're doing the test one, I would recommend just doing your current IP address. For security reasons, I'm just going to have it allow access from anywhere because I don't want my IP address showing up on here. And then we are going to create, it looks like my stuff is already saved in here, but let me see. So this is my basically username, and then this is going to be a fake password. Because again, changing all of this, it's going to be deleted as soon as I'm done creating this video, and then I will do something different for our next video by just changing the passwords to keep things secure. So now we are saying, all right, anyone can connect to this database, but they do need to have these credentials. And these credentials are what are going to end up in our .env file, which is going to be secure because the only place it's going to be available is up in the ether space for Heroku, and then it's going to be in our development space. So we have this set up. We're going to create our database user now. And now that we know our fake password and our fake username, we are ready to connect our application to this database. So we're going to choose a connection method. We are going to be connecting our application. So we click on here, and we already know that we're using a later version of Node, and we are using node.js. And this is the code that we want to copy. So we're going to look in a second to see, but basically all we're going to need to do is change the name of this to, well, we'll just copy it, and then we're gonna edit it in our application here. So in the .env file, this one is the test one, so I'm just going to copy and paste this in here. And I already see Genabot 5000. For the password, we're going to put fake password 123. And then for my first database, we are going to put for test video test. And we want to make sure that it's case accurate. So when we're looking in here, you can see it makes it all caps right here, but if we look at it here, you can see that this is what it looks like. If you try to change the caps, Mongoose and Mongo will get confused because they'll be like, hey, I don't see what you typed in. I'm only seeing this. And we're going to bypass that. So now that we have this one set up, we want to do the exact same thing for our production database. So we're going to connect. We are going to let it come from anywhere. And this is something you should do for, actually, I suppose the most secure thing would be to get the IP address from Heroku and have it be the only thing that can connect to the database. But for description's sake, we're going to do the exact same thing. Just let it be anyone can connect to the database. And then we're going to use the exact same credentials, fake password 123, and that is now this database's user as well. And we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to get our connection string. We're going to paste it in here. Put in our fake password. And this one we know is just for test video. Okay, so we know that we have our two URLs. So basically at this point, we have officially created the database through our MongoDB account. We created our project, and then we created our cluster, which is our database. And we know that we have one that's real and one that's our test, and that's now plugged into our .env file. So now we want to see, all right, does our application connect to our database the way that we want it to? And I'm going to show you how I use Mongoose to plug into this database just using the URL. Basically, this boilerplate makes it really, it's really easy for you to just create the database, and then you can use these files to actually put the data into your database. So the first thing I want to show you is the models, and this is what I was talking about in how I do like Mongoose, because you can set up a schema with a file. And just to elaborate, I'm going to show you. So we call Mongoose, and then we say, all right, this is our exercise schema. Again, for this first video, we're going to keep it really simple so that the video is not like 4 hours long. But we're saying, all right, we're creating our schema. It's a new Mongoose schema. This schema only has two. If you're from SQL, you could think of it as columns. But essentially, it's if it's MongoDB that we're working with, it's just key value pairs. So we have an exercise name and we have a date created. And then we have some specifics here and what we would expect. So if someone tries to put an object in here, that's not going to work. And then we have whether or not it's required, because obviously if there's no exercise name, it'll be really hard to find it. And then the date created, which is obviously a date type, but then we're going to put a default because I don't need someone to have to input the date, because the database can, or the server and the database can just create it. So the default will just be right now. So basically if I plug in an exercise, this field will just automatically fill itself. And then we are going to create our model with this schema attached to it. So we're saying, okay, MongoDB, you're going to have a model in your database called exercise, and you're going to use this schema to dictate what is going into your model. And then we're going to export it. So we're saying, all right, this is something that's going to go into your database. For each entry into this particular collection, we're going to expect each thing to look like this model, which is based on this schema that we've created. And this can be as big or as little as you want it to be. Like you could add, something here, and you could even have it do like type object, and then you could have something within that. And this is something that I think is phenomenal, because that is not something you can get with SQL. SQL is just like, think visually, a grid. You can't have like a bunch of information in one cell of that grid. You have to like pull that information from a different table, whereas with this, you can have information seated inside of itself. The Traversy Media video that I'm going to be sharing does a really good job of breaking that down. So this is just kind of the, hey, this is what it should look like. But then I have another file here that is going to actually seed our database. So you can see here, there are a couple of things happening at the top. We're using .env, which tells us, okay, we're probably going to be pulling that URL that we just plugged in. We're using mongoose, and then we're using that model, which we have right here that we have created. So the first thing, obviously, is to connect to the database. And you can see here, we're using the .env file, atlas URI, and we are, this right here is just making sure that we're using the most up-to-date features on MongoDB, because if you don't, you'll get either a flag or it won't let you do it. And then this is the data that we're going to seed in. Very simple, just 2 lines, right? Or 2 different models in our collection. Or 2 entries based on the model in our collection. So this, you can actually have default to object ID. I had it set up like this because if we want to seed data that's going to communicate with each other, then you just want to put in the flat ID, because otherwise, if you seed something and it automatically creates the object ID, and then you seed in something else and it automatically creates the ID, those IDs aren't going to match. So that's why I have this set up this way. But then you can see I don't have a date created because I'm expecting that that will be automatically populated for us. So then this function here is just, it's going to clear it. So basically the exercise model in our database is going to be completely cleaned out. And then if there's an error, there's, our error catch here. And then assuming there's no error, we're going to take the data that we created right up here. We're going to plug it into our database, and that's it. If it doesn't go well, it's going to say there's a database error. And if it does go well, it's going to say, hey, we inserted this, and this is what we inserted. So this is a great way to see if we are connecting into the database the way that we would expect to be. So to test this, I do have a script in here. This is the other thing I like about this boilerplate, is that I have some variable or some scripts that are already set up for us. And we're going to do seed production because basically, like I said, we just want to test to see, okay, are we connected to our database, and is this file set up the way that we expect it to, so that it will take this exercise data and put it into our database. So let's see. So you want to do npm, and then you want to do run. So it always needs to be npm run, because you're saying, hey node, I want you to run this script. So now we can type seed production, and then we're going to expect to not see an error. We're going to expect to see a console log that says, hey, we seeded this, and you're good to go. So it looks like it didn't work, but it didn't give an error. So it doesn't have a specific error saying anything like, hey, this didn't work, or there was a particular error. It's just saying that the buffering timed out, which tells me that it has something to do with our link. Okay, so I am not going to edit this video when I'm debugging because I think it's a good way to show the process. So I did get an error when I tried to seed this, and it says it's because the buffering timed out, which tells me that it has something to do with either our URL here or that our database just isn't letting us connect with it. And when I looked here, I actually saw that I sometimes they call me Speedy Jenna. Sometimes I'm a little faster than it's good to be fast, but it is good to double check things. And it looked like I clicked choose a connection method and everything for the for test video, basically our production one, but I didn't actually tell the database to allow access from anywhere. So we want to add that IP address. So now this should be set up exactly as we want it to, because now it's allowing us to connect to it, essentially. So definitely make sure that you have it set up to either connect to your personal IP address or to connect to just anywhere, just to make it open while you're setting things up in the development mode. So we're just going to wait a second for the changes to be deployed, and then we're going to jump back in, and then we're going to expect to see that the error that we just saw has now been resolved. Okay, so we are going to try this again. Now that it looks like we're allowed to connect, we're going to do the exact same thing. npm run cd production. And this time we are not expecting an error. There we go. We are expecting to see that the exercises were inserted. And we are expecting to see the data that we inserted. So as you can see, the date created was automatically added, and then also this was added. So this happens with anything that you insert into MongoDB, and I think it's good because it shows you like the version of basically if you patch it, or I mean really if you patch it or put. I think patch or put is when you are either replacing the data entirely or you're editing the data somehow. That version is going to change because that's basically just what this means is version. So these are both version 0, of course. So now we basically know that our database is live and we can connect to it using the URL. So I can trust that since this one is set up the way it's supposed to be, that this one is also set up the way that it's supposed to be. But just to be doubly sure, I'm gonna check to make sure that I did allow, we need to be allowed to connect to this database. So I'm gonna click on this, and I'm going to click on connect. And yeah, it looks like I might have done the exact same thing. So basically what I did was I didn't click add IP address. So now we are set up for success. Now, while we're waiting for this to deploy its changes, we're going to go back in here and we're going to look at the app itself. Because as of right now, we've really just set up our environment. We have seen some of our scripts. We know the dependencies that we're working with. But how does the app actually work? So, when you look at the package.json, you can see the word main and then a file name. And basically what that tells you is, all right, this is where our application is actually starting. And if you're familiar with front-end development or back-end development, you know that that's how it works. There's one file that you look to first, and then that file may look at another file, and that file may look at 3 files, and those 3 files may look at 4 files, and that's really the, that's a good kind of hierarchy for your application, because what I was saying before in terms of maintainability and scalability, you do want things broken up in that way because it's easier to look at. It's easier to add things, and I could go on. But essentially, to what I was just saying, we know that the app is starting in server.js. So when we click on server.js, this file here, we can see that we are using .env. We are using the app file, which is right here. We are using mongoose. And we are pulling from our .config. So this config file, which is right here, is really what interacts with .env or utilizes .env. So when you click on it, you can see that we are requiring it because we have to use it. And then this is what we're exporting are these key value pairs that we're going to be using in our app. So you can see we have the port, the node environment, our Atlas URI, our JWT secret, and our JWT expiration. So I think it's really important to mention that in this, there is like basically a fallback key or value for these key value pairs, because if something were to get, like, I don't know, if it lagged or something like that, you don't want the whole thing to break. So we just have some default variables here. And you can see here, so obviously we saw port. The node environment will default onto development, but it's going to pull from our process.env, which could be production, and then or test. And then the Atlas URI, we're actually dictating depending on whether or not we are running a test. Because if we're running a test, we want to use the test Atlas URI, and if we're not, then we want to use the regular Atlas URI. This is a ternary. I love ternaries. You're going to see a few of those. It's basically saying, hey, is this, oh, well, actually, this is the whole ternary. It's saying, hey, is the environment test? If so, then use the test Atlas URI. Otherwise, use this. I think it's so clean. If we did if else, it would just be a lot more code. It'd be messier. It still works, and for some cases it can be really good. And the thing with ternaries is you do need an either or, whereas with if, you can just have an if statement. You could have if else if, you could have if else, so just worth mentioning. So back to our server.json, we are pulling the port. Let's see, I'm going to put this right here. We are pulling from the port value here and the Atlas URI value here. And then first thing the server needs to do is connect to our database, which we know works because we just did it with our seed file. We're going to connect using the Atlas URI. We are calling the connection mongoose, or we're calling the connection property from mongoose. And then we're saying once it's open, just let us know. Say that it connected successfully. And then we are also going to set up this entire server to listen. So basically, the server is going to pay attention to whichever port it's running on. So like I said, when you look in here, it like defaults to 8000. That's if we were running localhost. If we're running this up in the ether space through Heroku, that port can vary, but that's why we're pulling from the process.env.port. So that's all that this does right here. But you can see that we're setting the app up to listen, and that is the file that is going to be holding, well, our application. So when we go into app, you can see that we are calling Express. We're calling the middleware that I explained. So, well, I didn't explain it, but I'm going to explain it now. So Morgan is a logger. So basically Morgan is going to say, oh, hey, you got a GET request to this, and this is the response you got. Cores is the cross-origin. Basically it's a safety measure. If I had this app running without cores, a lot of people couldn't connect to the app because this actually adds like the appropriate information and almost like a little signature to keep things secure so that I can communicate with other IP addresses and I can make calls to my database without having the browser be like, oh, hey, I don't trust this source. Now, the thing about cores is it gives a lot of information, some of which can make you vulnerable, and that's where Helmet comes in, because Helmet will take certain parts of that information out to keep your application safe. So Morgan, CORS, and Helmet are all middleware that we're using. And then you can see here we're calling from the .config, which we know is calling from our .env file. And then we are calling an example router, which I will explain in a minute. So the Morgan option, this is basically, this is another ternary, but we're saying like Morgan is a logger and it can share a ton of information, or it can share just a little itty bit of information. And if we're in production mode, we obviously don't want it to say, oh, hey, here's the error that you had in your server, because it could be a vulnerability and someone could see it or find it and then use that information against your application. But if we have something like this, we're saying, hey, are we in production? If so, make the logs just tiny. Just say, hey, you got this error. Otherwise, just do what we would expect you to do in terms of saying, oh, hey, this is what went wrong. This is the error that you had. And now we're actually going to set up our server. So we're calling Express because Express.js is the actual server. And then we're telling our server to use Morgan. Morgan is using our Morgan option, which is going to vary depending on what node environment we're in. We're telling app to use Helmet. We're telling app to use CORS. And then the last thing we're telling our app to use, well, not the very last thing, but the last middleware that we're telling our app to use is express.json. And what express.json is basically just, it makes it so that our server will accept JSON formatted data. Otherwise, we'll get like undefined or it won't go through. But as long as we do this, then we can communicate with a basic GET request that is fortunately the consistent across the board way that you make most requests, is with .json files, or .json data rather. So we're not going to do this right now. We'll jump into this in a second. But what we want to do first is look at these two parts. So this is, so app.get is we're saying, all right, app, okay, server. If someone makes a GET request to our flat endpoint, then make the response with a status of 200, which if you're not familiar with the response statuses, I'd recommend getting like a bookmark or something that lists them, but they're pretty basic. It's like 200 is yes, this went right and you got the information. 201, I believe, is yes, this went right and you added something to the server or to the database. 204 is yes, it went right and you deleted something. If it's 404, which basically everyone's familiar with 404, right? 404 is like, oh, hey, I can't find this. Or it doesn't exist. Or I can't find it because it doesn't exist. And then 500 is, hey, the server messed up. And you can actually see that in our error handler function that we have right here. So for this basic GET request, this is how we're going to first test our server. We're gonna just basically make a flat GET request to the home endpoint, and we're gonna expect to get a status of 200 and just this string. It's gonna say hello MongoDB and Express boilerplate. Now the error handler is great because let's say you make it through all the middleware and you make it to here, but the GET request is to something random like, I don't know, a bunch of random words. If you have it set up to this, it's gonna just go to next. It's not gonna make sense to this part of the app, and it's gonna end up being sent to our error handler. And the error handler is also protecting our data in the same way that Morgan is, because Morgan logs the activity of the server, but the error handler is going to log the activity of any errors that basically made it all the way to the error handling portion of our server. So it's doing the same thing. And it's interesting because we could change this to a ternary that would be like let response equal does node environment equal production, but we actually can't because we have another step right here. So basically I could have said let response equal node environment equals production, question mark, response equals this, or response equals this. But since we want a console.error, we're going to leave it as the if else, but that's an example of when you would want to use an if else statement versus a ternary. But I digress. So basically, again, doing the same thing, it's protecting our information. If we're in production, all we're going to get is server error. It's not going to give us any of the nitty-gritty details. But if we're not in production, if we're in test mode, or if we're in, test environment, or in our development environment, we do want that information so that we can debug it, right? So it's going to say, hey, there's an error, and it's going to give us more details on our error. It console logs the response, but then it also gives our response with a status of 500 and the JSON format of the response. So basically we'll communicate, we can communicate back and forth with the JSON data. The reason why this doesn't have .json is because it's just a string. But if you're doing objects and stuff, you're going to turn that into .json. So that's our app. That's it, really. If we're starting flat, like if we're starting with just this app.get. So we are going to test this, and so there are two different ways we can do this, and I'm going to show you both ways. The first way that we can do, and this is the way that I think people are more likely to do if they're newer to this, is they're going to run nodemon, and they are going to like make a call to the server with either their browser or with Postman. So we'll just do that. We're going to do npm run dev. And then we're going to expect to see, oh yeah, so you can see here, it's saying, all right, nodemon is running, the Express server is running on 8000, and we have connected to our MongoDB database. Now, we are currently in development, but it is connected to our production database. So let's just take a look, because actually the database isn't really in the equation right now, because when you look at app, this isn't doing anything with our database. It's just sending a string. So let's do this. I want to say localhost 8000. So we're just making a flat call. So we should expect to see, there we go. Hello, MongoDB and Express boilerplate. That's because we have our server running locally through the terminal, and you can see right here, Morgan is logging. So it's saying, hey, you made a GET request to this. And we can see that the browser tried to get a favicon, but we don't have one because this isn't a front-end application. So we got what we expected when we're looking at the browser. So that's one way to do it, but we are not going to be doing it that way. We're going to be utilizing our tests. So, so let's jump into that and look at those. So if you see a file .spec.js, I keep it here in a test folder. I think that the way that this like architecture of the files of this application is pretty solid, and it's going to be really easy for us to build on to keep everything organized and separated. So when we go into the test folder, we're going to just look at app.spec.js. So, so to kind of break down the test itself, so we are calling our app, we're calling mongoose because we need it to connect to our database. We're calling the test URI, and we are we have a file to seed our test tables, but we're not gonna go into that part yet. All we're gonna do to start is this one. So we're saying get /response with 200 containing hello, MongoDB, and Express boilerplate. So I do have 2 tests here that I'm going to cover in this video, but to start, we're only going to do this one. So we can just do it.only. So we're basically saying, okay, just run this one test. So we're going to Control C, and we're going to type npm test. And we got an error. So just another quick little debugging. I do want to show the debugging. I got an error that said make exercises array is not a function, and I can see here that it's coming from the seed test tables file that I have. So I went in and I saw that it was saying make exercises array, but in this file it was actually called make exercises arr. So in order to fix it, I just added AY, and we'll go into that in a minute. But again, what we want to do to start is just look at this one test that says when we make a GET request to the / we expect 200 and hello MongoDB and Express boilerplate. And so that's why it says .only. So we're going to do that again. And actually, I already tested it there, you can see, but we're still going to just run it again so you can see what it looks like. So then you can see that it basically, we got a log from Morgan that says, hey, you made this GET request, you got 200. And then it says here, get /response, we got a check mark, aka we expected 200 and this string, and that's exactly what we got. Now, if I were to do something like hello MongoDB and Express boilerplate Genabot, and now I ran the test, it's not going to work. But the cool thing about the tests is it shows you why it didn't pass and what it got instead, which I think is great because, I mean, this to me is much easier than trying to use a browser or Postman or even your front end application, because you're building your tests are set, and then you're getting a really good, clear picture. So it's saying, hey, I expected hello MongoDB and Express boilerplate Genabot, but then I got just this. So now obviously we know that this is what we should be expecting because that's how it's set up right here, but we'll just take that off. So supertest, I almost forgot to mention supertest. Supertest is an awesome little module that will make the API calls for us, and these can get much more complicated, which we will see a little bit of an example of in just a second. But basically it makes the calls for us. We're saying, hey, use this app and make calls to get at the first /, and this is what we expect. So we know that our server's working, right? We can tell based on this one test that if we make a call, we are getting the response that we expect. So, so now what I want to do is show you the router. So when we were in here, we skipped over the importing the router and using the router. So basically this is where we can really start to develop our API and create our endpoints. And as an endpoint example, I'm just going to put example router. And so what we're saying is, hey app, I want you to use at this endpoint, if someone makes a request to this particular endpoint, use this. And example router is something that we're importing from our routers folder, and it's the example router file. So we're going to look at that. And what we're doing here is, I mean, essentially it's like we're just taking our server and we're just spreading it out. We're making it a little bigger. We're adding a file that's connecting to the exact same server, but now it's like in its own file. So basically, as an example, let's say I had exercises and I also had user exercises and I also had comments and I also had users. We would have different router files for each of those endpoints. So we're calling express, and then we're going to be calling the exercise model, because this model file, it doesn't just dictate, okay, this is what we're expecting to see and this is the model. It's also saying, hey, this is what we're looking for in the database. So, so that's where that comes in. And then we're creating our router here called exercises router by calling express.router. So now that we have this called, we're going to add what we want to it. So we're doing exercises router dot root. So we're saying, okay, this is where basically this is what this is the point you're listening to. And if someone makes a get call, we're gonna use this async function. Now I really like asynchronous calls. When I first started doing this, I was using .then, and that works, but it is very messy. It's extremely messy because you can have .thens just completely cascading, and then it can be a little confusing in terms of like, okay, I called this .then, how do I basically get out of the .thens to get back to where I was? Async is cool because you just make a try catch block, and then when you say it's an asynchronous function, you're just telling, you're then able to tell that function to await certain things. So basically, where .then is also saying, hey, wait for the results of this promise, await does the exact same thing, and it's just cleaner because .then is like the parentheses, and like there's a lot of parentheses and brackets, and it's definitely just messier. So what we're doing here is we're saying, all right, what we're going to try to do is create a variable called exercises, and to get that variable, we're going to wait to find the exercise model in our mongoose, or in our MongoDB. Now I did .lean here because if you don't do .lean, you just get so much more information, and we're not trying to do that. We're just trying to get our flat object data. Basically, what we want to see when we get our when we make our request is this, which is the data that you would expect to see when you're making a request for your front-end application. So .lean, if there are no exercises, return a status of 404 and say that the exercises were not found. So basically we're saying, like, if this didn't ever get a value, then we need a 404. Now if I get an empty array, that still means that they technically found it. They just didn't, there just wasn't anything in it. And then we are returning to await. So basically we are returning the results of this. So this, obviously, it can happen right away, but if I'm looking for a .json of the exercises and the exercises is waiting for this, then I need to wait for this to get this. So basically when you put await, it's almost the equivalent of saying .then without having to do all the parentheses and making it mucky. And then of course when you're doing async await, you need to have a try catch block. So with the try catch, we're basically just protecting ourselves because if this goes wrong and we don't have a catch here, it would just go, we'd just be awaiting forever, and we don't want that to happen. So if this doesn't work out, we have our catch, so it's going to take that error that came from this, and it's going to call next, which we know is going to pass it to our error handler. Because if we're in app and we try to get in here and it's saying, no, that doesn't work, next, and then if we go to here and we're like, no, this isn't the request that they made, next, then we end up at the error handler and it will tell us what went wrong. So, so this is our example router. Very simple. We're not doing anything crazy in this video because we're already pushing for over an hour. And if you've watched this far, I really appreciate you, and I hope that you're learning a lot. And then we're going to export the router. So to export the router, it's just this, of course, and then that's how we call it in with into our app file. And so again, we're telling our app that if someone makes a call to this, make sure you use this example router file, and then the example router file. So the cool thing here is you can see we're setting up the endpoint right here. So this only needs one slash because it isn't even going to make it here unless it gets through this endpoint. And then because it's just right now, it's just set for a get, we are expecting that this is going to go into our database, find the exercises that we plugged in, and then return them back to us with a status of 200. So now that we know that, let's go back to our test, because our test is also set up to test for this functionality. So basically, let's look at the test and see how we spelled it out. So we said, let's take off the it.only. So if we try to get to /API/example, we expect it to respond with 200 and a list of exercises. So what I want to do to start is I'm going to comment this part out so that you can see what it looks like if we just run it without actually putting, basically what we're going to do is we're not going to put anything into our seed, we're not going to seed anything into our test database, and then we're going to see what the test wants to do when we do that. Oh, so I think this is because when I ran the original test, it went ahead and seeded the test database, which is why this is working. But let's see, I think so since I commented it out, another cool thing about MongoDB is if you're a visual type of person, you can just look right in here. So to kind of go to the beginning, we're looking at our projects, we're going into our test database, and if we click on collections, we're gonna see the information that we received. Yeah, right here. But we don't want that. I want to show you what it looks like when it doesn't work. So we're going to drop this database, or drop this collection rather, and now we don't have anything in it. So I commented out this, and now we are going to run the test again, and we're expecting that one of these tests is going to fail. And it did. And that's because there isn't anything in our test database. So it's great because you can see here, it didn't give us a 404, it just gave us an empty array because it did find the right spot. There just wasn't any data in it, but we want it to have some data in it because we're going to plug the data in, and that way we can better assess. Like, it's important that when you're running your test that you're basically putting the data right into the database prior to testing it, because then you'll have a very clear understanding of what's in that database, and then you know exactly what you're supposed to expect. So for the example, we're keeping it very simple, but you can see here, if we make a GET request to this endpoint, we expect it to respond with 200 and the list of exercises. So we're calling supertest on the app. If we get the API at this endpoint, we expect a status of 200, and then, and this is where .then is nice, because we're saying then, with that response that we get, we're going to console log the response. This is more for debugging purposes, so we could take this out in a second, but we're expecting the body of the response to be an array, and we're expecting the response body to have a length of 2. So if I took this off and I ran the test again, the test is going to pass because I did still get an array, right? I just didn't get an array with a length of 2 because we didn't put anything in the database. So I'm going to uncomment this. So this is what we're going to be expecting. And then we're going to look up here at the top to kind of see, okay, what is this test actually doing? Because we know we're calling supertest to make requests to the app, but where does the database come into play? So at the beginning of our test, we're going to connect to our test database, and then we are expecting, we want the app to just say, hey, we connected to the database. And then right here, we're going to seed our collection. So in order to seed our collection, we are going to call the seed test tables function with our test database URI. So seed test tables is being imported from this file. And this is literally, it's just the exact same file as, well, not exactly, but it's a similar file to the seed, basically our seed production database. The only thing that's different here is that we basically have dummy test data that we're seeding in versus the production data. But it's doing the same thing. So we have our function here. We're going to connect. We are going to with the exercise model, we're getting rid of it. We're wiping the slate clean. And then we're going to create, using the exercises array to fill the test database back up. And then you can see right here, make exercises array, which is where that bug came from, is coming from the fixtures file, which is right here. And make exercises array is right here. So we have more data plugging in here, but that's the other cool thing about MongoDB is you can add extra. It's not going to yell at you. It's not going to say, hey, you can't put this in here, because MongoDB is just a little more fluid in that way, and I do think that that's great. I do think that there's a little bit of risk with the flexibility because, like I said, without consistency, it's much harder to know exactly when you should do what you're doing. But MongoDB is a great little like midway point as long as you're adding some structure for yourself. So we're going to basically create this array. We're going to send it over here to seed test tables. This function is going to plug that data into our database. And then when we run the test, we'll expect the data that we created. So we know what to expect. So again, keeping it very simple for this first video just to kind of show all the working parts. But now that I've uncommented the seed test tables, we're going to expect that we're going to expect an array with a length of 2 because this function, before we run our other tests, we're expecting that it's going to seed the test tables, and then when we make the call, it's going to look into that test database and see the data that we just put into it. Now I did add this line here. Basically all we're doing is we're saying before each test, just wait a second. And the reason why is because if I don't have this, this test will fail because the test is going to run before the table or the collection is seeded. So it'll be like, oh, hey, this is wrong because there's nothing in it. And then like, actually, I'll just show you. So we'll comment this out and then we're going to run this test again. And you can see, so see how it says, oh, hey, this didn't pass. And then right after it says exercises were inserted. So that's what this fixes. So now we're going to uncomment this. And now we're going to run our test. And now we can see that both tests are passing because and you can see it wasn't a ton of time, right? But it's like half of a second of time difference, but we just have to give our seed function a chance to run and actually put stuff in the database before we try to, you know, figure out, do we have the right stuff in the database? So, we did our exercises. We got a 200. We got an array that's a length of 2 because that's exactly what we plugged in. So now we can tell ourselves, okay, so we know that our production database is hooked up the way it should be. We know that our server is running appropriately, and if someone makes a GET request, that the app is actually listening for it. We know that our test database is connected appropriately, and we know that if we use our example router, that it is actually going in, finding what we're looking for, and sending it back to us. So this is all the testing and all of the database development we're going to do for this video because, like I said, we're starting simple, right? This is something we can definitely build on, right? Now we know we could make more routers, we could add more data, we could have this one router do different things. We could have it do a GET request for a specific ID, maybe look for only one exercise from the array that has this ID, or maybe we want to add an endpoint to, or maybe just have this be post, have a post function on this router so that if someone makes a post, they can add an exercise. So again, I mean, sky's the limit at this point because we've got all these nice little bases set up. And I think this is a great time to just deploy this database because we have 2 endpoints, just our flat one and then the one with our exercises. And we know that it's communicating with the database and we've got perfectly running tests. So now that we want to set this up in to production and put it out there into the ether space, I want to mention that that's where this file comes in, this proc file. Very simple. It's just saying, hey, you're using Node and you're starting here at the server.js file. That's the gist of that. And then otherwise, Heroku is going to look at your package.json file and it's going to use the Node version. It's going to use the dependencies, and then it's going to prune the dev dependencies. So if by now you haven't made a Heroku account, you should do that. So set up your Heroku account now that you have one. Actually, before we do that, let's change the name of our branch because it's still master, and that happens automatically in the terminal, but we do want it to be main because that's how GitHub reads it and that's how Heroku reads it now. So all we need to do is git add period, and then we're going to git commit with a message, and we're going to say ready for deployment. So now that we've actually made a commit in our fresh Git, because at the very beginning we reset everything, we want to do git branch m main. So I'm pretty sure this is just saying, hey, for this branch, we're going to change the name to main, and we'll see. Perfect. So yeah, so now it says main. So now that that's set up, we want to just type Heroku login. And then it's going to, oh, well, it lets me press any key to open up the browser. So I'm logging in through the browser. Oh, and Heroku does do the authentication, so we're going to do that. Okay, so we verified. I'm never mad about extra authentication. I'm a huge fan of trying to keep things as safe as possible. So now you can see we logged in by just typing Heroku login, because it pulls up the browser and then has us log in through the browser. So now that we've done that, we are going to create our server up to Heroku. So we're going to say Heroku. So now that we are officially logged in, we can do Heroku create. And you could just do this and then let it go. I don't recommend that, because that is what I used to do. And when you do that, Heroku just comes up with a random name for your server, and that can be very confusing if you have, 3 or 4 servers, and one's named like Gilded Wave Crest and one's Spiky Teddy Bear. I don't know. You won't know which app it's for. So again, for consistency's sake, we're going to call this, for test video. And when we do that, it's going to basically create for us an application in Heroku. So it created the application in Heroku called for test video with our login, so in our account, and then it also connected our Git to this remote. So to test that to be sure, or to double check, you can do git remote v, and then you can see here we have 2 remotes, well, 1 remote to Heroku that we can pull from and push from. So now that we officially have it created, we want to before we actually deploy it, there's one other thing that we need to do, and it's set our environmental variables in Heroku. So again, we know that this .env file is not going to leave our computer. So Heroku is not going to take it, because that's also involved with Git. GitHub wouldn't take it. Git is ignoring that file. So in order to make it so that our Heroku server will connect to our MongoDB, we need to give it this variable. So all we have to do actually is just copy this entire line. So we're saying Atlas URI equals this string, and then we just have to go Heroku config set. So we're saying, all right, Heroku, for your part of the configuration is to set this environmental variable. We're going to paste this. So we're saying the Atlas URI is the string, and we are going to press return. And you can see that it's setting Atlas URI, and it restarted our app. So now that environmental variable exists in our Heroku app. Now the very last thing we need to do is deploy. And I have a script in here for that. That's just, we will do npm run deploy, but what it's doing is it's git push to Heroku in the main branch. So we'll do npm run deploy. And what this is going to do is it's just like when you push to GitHub, it's writing the entire application, it's putting it all together, it's putting it up to Heroku. Heroku already has the environmental variable to get into our MongoDB. And then you can see here it's like I said, it has a node environmental variable. These are all just environment variables. It installed the dependencies, and then it pruned the development dependencies because obviously we don't need it because this is a production server. And it says here that the build was succeeded. So that's it. We now have our very own API that we have created from scratchish using this boilerplate. Now, the last thing I want to do to test this is we're going to go into Heroku. We're going to look at our apps. And we can see here, there's our server that we created. You can see here the configuration variables right here. There's our Atlas URI, so our server knows to use that variable, and that's the value of it. And you can see, so this is the URL of the actual server now, aka someone on another computer is going to be able to access this API. That is also shown right here. So we're going to just test this. So again, we're not calling to localhost. We're not using our own computer. We're using remotely Heroku. So when I press return, you can see here, it's making our flat GET request, which we already know is going to say, hello, MongoDB and Express boilerplate. And then we also expect that if we do /API/example, so again, looking in here, so we expect that if we do API example, it's going to give us the list of exercises. And we know that the exercises are in there because right at the beginning of this video, we actually seeded these 2 exercises into our production database. So now, let's try this and see what we get. And there you have it. So we have there's 1 exercise, and there's our second exercise. So 2 exercises. Again, like I said, this is not normally how you would make your calls. You could use Postman. You're most likely using a front-end application. But based on the tests that we used, it set us up for success to know that this is going to give us the results that we expect. So that's it. If you've gone through this video with me, I hope that you enjoyed it and you're feeling empowered that you now know how to create your own API. Really, sky's the limit. You can add as much data as you want into this. You can create, multiple routers to multiple endpoints. You can add, multiple collections into your database that you can access. And in the videos that I make after this, I think the next video that we'll do is we're going to focus a little bit on the, I guess we can focus on how to start using like multiple collections and multiple routers. And then after that, we'll start to kind of dig into authentication because that's a really exciting thing. But, I hope you enjoyed the video. I really appreciate you watching it. It's always a learning experience for me to get to push these things out. And explaining what I do and kind of walking through it, I really think is the absolute, like, verbalizing is the best way to learn, in my opinion, because it's one thing when the stuff is sitting in your head. It's a completely different thing when you can explain it to somebody else and when you can walk through it. That's just a different way of learning that I think just adds on to like the ingestion of it and the execution of it. So I'm going to add the link to this video into the repo, and then if you found this video on YouTube, the repo is going to be below, as well as the videos that I found really valuable from James Quick and Traversy Media. And definitely open to feedback. I'm really trying to get myself more into just learning more and further developing the skills that I have in place. And I know the only way to do that is to connect with other people that are that can help me to learn more. So feedback is super appreciated. Questions are welcome, because if hopefully I'm able to answer the questions, and then maybe I'm learning even more. And then of course, this is my very first video. It's long and there may have been some things that I missed. So just be nice. And if you liked the video, feel free to follow me. I am JennaBot5000 on Twitter. I'm Jenna Chestnut on GitHub, and I have a website, jennachestnut.com, and you can kind of follow me in my journey. And hopefully we will continue to learn and grow together. All right, bye.